All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and if you could, if you're able, stand and we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Pape,
Here.
Councilmember Shavetta,
Here.
Councilmember Hands,
Here.
Councilmember Caldwell,
Here.
Councilmember Leahy,
Here.
Councilmember Neal,
Here.
Councilmember Ryder,
Here.
Councilmember Silvers,
Here.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Here.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is public items. Members of the public are encouraged to use this time to make comments about matters that do not appear on the agenda. Comments about items on the regular agenda will be taken up as each item is considered. Please note there's a 5-minute time limit. I have nobody that has signed up yet, but if anybody that didn't realize you were supposed to sign up would like to come forward, now would be the opportunity. I see, there you go. Please come forward and state your name and your address for the record.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Thelma Fowler. I'm at 9921 West 65th Drive in Merriam. That's West Vernon Place. I thought I signed up over there, but I came in right here at the end. So
Okay. There's no problem.
I just have a few questions that I'm hoping that I could get some updates on or find out when updates will be available. Specifically, I'm coming out to find out what the status update is on the 2022 stormwater study that was done for West Vernon Place by the BHC civil engineering firm. Specifically, when is that work going to be started? And what option has the city opted to move forward on?
Okay, that's a good question, and I will probably turn that over to Mr. Ingolf. I could give my answer, but I'll refer to him.
The study's been complete. How are you, Thelma? The study's been complete. We have preliminary engineering, I think, scheduled in the last year of this CIP, so 27, with the project coming forward in 28. The option that has been selected in there, and you're putting me a little bit on the spot here, was one that would bring, there were 3 options in there. I believe the one that we selected was the one that would capture all of the water off of the street. So it would increase curb size. I'm going to look at Jim here because it increases the curb side. It adds a bunch of additional drainage in the streets behind the curbs and captures the water that is street water, which brings it up to APWA standards because it
Okay.
is not currently at APWA standards. It wasn't built that way.
Okay, and I get that. There's 4 options, though, so I'm still not sure which one. Is it either 2 or 3?
Again,
Or maybe
I
we
mean,
can-
I haven't looked at the study in months. I'm just telling you
Okay.
what I recall. There was an option that brings it up to I believe it's APWA standard. I think it's option 3. Yeah, I think it's option 3.
Awesome, okay. And is there any possibility to get that moved closer so that we're not waiting till 2028?
That would be up to the council. We've put it in there where we think it makes the most sense in terms of our budgetary ability to pay for it and when we think we're going to be in there to do the street again. So we're trying to coordinate it with other projects that we would have in the neighborhood.
Okay. I would suggest seeing if we can't move it up a little sooner. It's affecting West Vernon Place. It has been for a long time. The city has done 2 studies to date. I personally have been there 16 years, and I would say in the last probably 5 to 7, it seems like it's getting worse. Simply, I don't know if the storms are more intense or if we're getting more rains, but I'm literally worried about my property. I'm kind of waiting on the city to find out where these inlays are going to be done so I can install some French drains on my property. I've already taken some steps to help some of the water runoff in my backyard by installing a rain garden. So that's over like $2,700 so far that I've put into my backyard. So I kind of feel like it needs to happen sooner rather than later. So I would appreciate your guys' consideration on that. The other thing, just to kind of keep a note, I don't know if this helps or not, but West Vernon Place chose not to go opt in with the sidewalks and that was a few years back. We asked to have money specifically for the issues in our neighborhood, which is stormwater. So if there's any consideration to move that up, even part of the work, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thelma. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward at the public hearing? Okay, or public meeting right now? Okay, well, we will close out the public items on that and move right on to the consent agenda. So let me put my glasses on so I can read. Okay, all items under the heading are considered to be routine by the city council and may be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member so requests, in which case that item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Are there anybody that would like to have any item removed from the consent agenda? Okay. Seeing nobody want anything removed, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Hans.
I move that the council approve consent agenda items 1 and 2.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, Ms. Shadrich.
Mr. Mayor, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, moving on, the next item is going to be a public hearing, but I think we're going to have Mr. Director Dyer come up and head this up.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Brian Dyer, Community Development Director. I'm kind of the MC for the next little bit here for this. Kind of give you all a rundown of what is on the next 3 items on your agenda and who all is going to speak towards those items. So, again, a little bit of background. This is related to the Merriam Grand Station. Merriam Grand Station project that you all approved back on July 11th. At that approval, you all approved a rezoning, a preliminary development plan, a final plat, and a TIF project plan, and a redevelopment agreement. That redevelopment agreement is the document that spells out the public-private partnership for this project. Again, for those who are not familiar with this, we're talking about the Kmart property and the significant redevelopment of that property. The developers proposed 2 apartment complexes, a number of commercial buildings in there, also a really interesting, great pavilion as a gathering spot. So that's what we're talking about this evening. So again, back to that redevelopment agreement. That redevelopment agreement details the public-private partnership. It details tax increment finance for that project, as well as the city's intent to consider issuing industrial revenue bonds for that project. Now, the industrial revenue bonds portion of that is what is going to be considered this evening. I'm going to again give you a really brief overview of it, and then I'm going to pass it on to Joe Sharano from Kutek Rock, who is our bond counsel. He has a presentation prepared for you on the IRBs, an overall presentation of IRBs, and then he'll also get in a little bit more of the specifics of these IRBs. After following his presentation, council can ask any questions they might have of him. Staff encourages you to ask questions at that point in time in regards to the IRBs. Following that, would be a public hearing on the IRBs, and it'll be just on the issuance of the residential portion of the IRBs. Again, Mr. Sharano is going to go a little bit more into detail of that. So it'll just be on that portion of the IRBs. And part of that public hearing presentation, Jeff White with Columbia Capital, the city's financial advisor, will give you a presentation on the cost-benefit analysis. The cost-benefit analysis was in your packet. After the close of the public hearing, there'll be 3 action items. The first action item will be the first amendment to the redevelopment agreement. A little bit about that. When we originally started all these conversations, we provided a number for the IRB issuance by the developer. When they went back through and did the submittal, the application submittal to us, they realized that some of the costs they had not included in that IRB number that they provided to us at the time of making the redevelopment agreement. So that number needs to be changed from 50 million to 102 million. Those are really big numbers, but Mr. Sharano is going to explain those to you much better than I as to what those numbers mean and how they really do not affect the overall financing of the project from the city's perspective. So following, considering that First Amendment, the council will move on to considering a resolution for the issuance of industrial revenue bonds for the residential portion of the project. And then next, they'll consider resolution of intent for issuance of IRBs for the commercial portion of that project. So with that, I'm going to pull up Mr. Serrano's presentation, and
Thank you,
I
Brian.
will let him have
These two buttons,
dais.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
all right,
there.
these two. All right,
Yep,
great.
yep.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, Joe Serrano, Kuteka Rock. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm going to apologize up front. I just got my glasses adjusted, so I'm having difficulties reading. So just bear with me. I've been asked to give this presentation. I've given this presentation to several other governing bodies. It's relatively high-level discussion associated with industrial revenue bonds. In light of what we're considering tonight, city staff thought it would be appropriate to just highlight what IRBs are. I could tell you my takeaways. I would hope that the two takeaways I would ask is that this is it's an odd type of financing that is required by statute. And secondly, and you've heard us say this in the past, that the city cannot lend its credit to this type of financing, and the city cannot pay out of its own funds for debt service of the bonds. So the first screen is for a little bit of a background.
We're having technical difficulties.
Can you just give us a half a second here?
Sure.
I think Julie's going to pull it up. You just have to ask Julie to forward it because I'm not getting that screen to show up on the.
Okay.
All right.
David.
Okay. No problem. Go ahead, Julie, for the next slide. Okay, so as a backdrop, real quickly, the IRB Act was enacted in 1961. It's really to provide, it's a financing vehicle for local governments to provide an economic incentive to private industry. The purposes are provided in the IRB Act. It's 121740 at SEEK. It's really to promote, stimulate, develop, encourage economic development within the city. It's for new industry or existing industries that are maybe expanding, relocating, to retain industry under some qualified purposes. And that's generally just a very high-level backdrop. Go ahead, Julie. I don't really want to get into the details of the taxable versus tax exempt too much, but in short, we're doing taxable bonds for Merriam Grand Station. There are some tax exempt financings for industrial revenue bonds, but this is not the type of them. Just as a distinguishing factor, if it's tax exempt, it's the income that the bond owner receives. It's exempt from taxation at the federal level. Industrial revenue bonds at the state level will always be exempt from state income tax. Julie. Sales tax, the type, I guess I have to do this one myself. Okay, the types of IRBs. We qualify these as, I qualify them in the vernacular, sales tax only IRBs or property tax abatements IRBs. Property tax abatements also have an element of sales tax exemption that are associated with it, but because the property tax is such a greater incentive, we kind of refer to these as property tax abatements, understanding that they're just sales tax exemption also associated with those types of bonds. Sales tax only IRBs, it's really to grant an exemption from sales tax on the construction materials used in the project. That is what we're doing for the Merriam Grand Station for consideration this evening. The Merriam Grand Station, the commercial space that we call it, or the area that's within the TIF district. We also have a property tax abatement on the apartments. So the property tax abatements is actually, if you grant this type of financing, what happens is the property is taken off the tax rolls for up to 10 years. There are two ways, and I apologize, because this is a recycled deal. This PS21 is a different policy statement from a different city, so I apologize for that. There are two ways to get property tax abatements. One is a constitutional abatement, which is in the Kansas Constitution. It's relatively limited. And what we're considering this evening are statutory industrial revenue bonds. Some projects have both, but generally we're relying on the statutory IRB and the IRB Act. permitted projects for sales tax exemption, IRBs, actually, the permitted types and of the projects and the permitted expenses apply to both a property tax IRB or a sales tax IRB. The permitted types of projects is newly acquired facilities for agricultural, commercial, hospital, industrial, natural resources, recreational development, and manufacturing. The permitted types of expenses include the purchase or acquire the land and improvements, to construct or reconstruct, and to improve the equipment, provide equipment, furnishings, repairs, or enlarge or remodel. Sales tax exemption for retail is allowed as long as it's within a permitted type of the project. Go ahead, Julie. But as I mentioned, permitted types of projects is the same whether it's a sales tax only IRB or a property tax abatement. The distinguishing factor is tax abatements on retail projects are not permitted. So we're not doing a tax abatement on the commercial space. Not only that, but also it's within a TIF district. The bond issue and tax abatement procedures, they're very similar to sales tax only procedures except the three distinguishing ones are items. First of all, the business submits an application to the city, which they've done in this instance, and I guess it's not for Merriam Grand Station, it's for generally speaking IRBs, but in this instance they have Columbia Capital and Jeff White, the city's municipal advisor, prepares a cost-benefit analysis. We will hold, or that's what has been noticed up this evening, to hold a public hearing on whether the city should grant that abatement. If approved, the city will adopt a resolution of intent. We'll actually have two resolutions of intent this evening for consideration, one for the, as Brian had mentioned, one for the apartments, one for the commercial space. Then the project is constructed. We'll be back before you with bond documents and a bond ordinance at a later time. Tonight is just for resolutions of intent. If you approve the bond ordinance, then we will issue the bonds, and we'll talk a little bit about what that actually means. And then at the very end of this initial phase, there's an application that is provided. Actually, it's called an IRBX, but it's an application requesting the Board of Tax Appeals to grant a BOTA order for up to 10 years, for up to that 10-year period. Interestingly, the 10-year period is important because the bonds, the order, it's really odd, but in the order itself, it says that the bonds have to be outstanding in order for the abatement to be in place. So you can't really redeem these bonds on a property tax abatements early. You have to actually keep those bonds out for that 10-year period of time. Cost, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, it should have been. Cost. We try to say that this is no cost to the city. I mean, you're losing an element of sales tax exemption and the element of the property tax abatement, but in terms of actual monies out of pocket, it's no cost to the city. The developer pays these listed costs, including the city's origination fee, bond counsel fee, Columbia Capital's fee, any state fees, trustees fees, title costs, and if the developer wants to run their attorney's fees through the bonds, they have the ability to do so. The mechanics, and we say this as a typical IRB, there's not really I mean, everything's a little bit different, but for a typical property tax abatement IRB, the city issues the bonds, the proceeds are used to acquire the land and construct and potentially equip the facility. The business, really, it's the business and the city determine who the trustee shall be. And the trustee actually is, we will eventually, I'll talk about this a little bit later, we assign all rights, duties, and obligations to the bond trustee except two rights, the notice right and the right to cure. The notice right and right to cure. So anything that would otherwise be an issue or responsibility is actually delegated to a bond trustee. The city owns the facility or leasehold interest in the facility during the period this time and then leases the project back. I'll get into the details a little bit more minutia in just a bit. But in this instance, we will enter into a leasehold, what we call a base lease, which the city will receive a leasehold interest in the project and then lease the project back to the developer. The lease is what is required by statute. The statute provides that the lease payments are necessary, or in the amount necessary to debt service the bond. So that rental payment under the lease, which is the lease that the city enters in, leasing the project back to the developer, that amount is the amount necessary to debt service bonds, and the only amount that is that can be pledged for payment of the bonds. During the term of the bonds, in this case, it acts as de facto. The developer acts as in all respects as the owner. In this case, with a leasehold structure, the developer will be the owner of the bond, but they have the obligation to pay the cost for maintenance, repairs, and insurance. When the bonds mature, and 10 years for the property tax abatement, there's this purchase option. We put $1,000 as consideration to buy the bond, to buy the property back. And then importantly, after the 10-year period expires and the bonds are matured and the property's conveyed back, then the property goes wholly onto the tax rolls. There are three things associated with the mechanics of the IRB. What is the role of the trustee? As I mentioned, we actually, as the city, assign any and all rights, duties, and obligations under the documents. The trustee then assumes those rights, duties, and obligations, and effectively is acting as an instrument, not an instrumentality, but as an agent for the city to perform the functions necessary to actually manage, administer, debt service the bonds. Are there other actions associated with IRBs? And the answer would be sometimes. If there's sometimes that we generally put in there that there's if the developer wants to lease a particular space, we want to know who actually is the city is who is eventually deriving a direct or indirect benefit. So we have certain consent rights. So if there's not so much on the apartments, but if we want to hold, if we want to know who is going into those out parcels, then we have consent rights. We may have to come back and ask for the city's consent. We may pre-consent in the documents depending on the negotiations. We could sometimes have to consent to certain easements as the city's role, and then eventually we will convey the property back. Typically, we come back at the very end to provide what we call just evidence for a title company that says, hey, listen, the city's taken all action necessary to perform in accordance with the bond term or bond documents, and therefore we're conveying the property back. And that resolution is sufficient for title companies in the future. Security for repayment, as I mentioned, and I'll talk in the next slide, this is a really big takeaway. And this is a question I always receive is, what are we doing here? What is the significance of this? The understanding that what we pledge for debt service, what is the pledge for the collateral of the bonds is really the facility itself, the rents under the lease, and any other monies that are held under the trust indenture. But again, it's not going to be the city's money or their credit. As I mentioned, there is no guarantee from the city for payment of the bonds. This is the statutory site that says we cannot use our monies necessary to pay. The only revenues that are debt service in the bonds are the rent payments under the lease. This is a little bit in the weeds, and this is kind of the typical situation and the typical structure. I'm about ready to wrap up, but this is you kind of have to follow along with the steps. So the first step, and this is just a typical situation, and that's why I say this is kind of an odd financing, but is necessary by statute. Step one is the city enters into a lease, the base lease with the developer, whereby the developer leases the land and improvements to the city. The city also enters into a lease with the developer, whereby the city leases the project back to the developer. Simultaneously, the city is entering into a trust indenture with the trustee that effectively we assign any and all rights, duties, and obligations. The city issues a bond, and then the bond trustee holds that bond until we're ready to close. When we close, which is step 4, effectively the bond owner and the company buy the bond. Buy, I'm going to say, I want to put in quotes because I want to explain just what typically happens in practicality, but effectively they buy the bonds. In this case, it would be a $102 million purchase in 2 different instances, and then they receive the bond. That is just that's how we end up when we close. Then if it's true financing, if you will, where there's monies held in a project fund, the bond trustee would then be paying monies over to the company to pay off, or to pay project costs. In the meantime, the company is going to be making debts, lease payments to the bond trustee, which in step 8 says you pay it down back to the bond owner. Practically speaking, however, because we have what we call developer-owned bonds, so the developer will be the bond purchaser, and the developer will be the tenant under the lease obligated to make these payments. And because we can do reimbursement of project costs, typically in this instance, there will not be a necessary $102 million bond purchase. It's going to be reimbursement of requisitions that evidence the purchase of the bonds over time. I know it's a little bit complicated, and I apologize, but just know there's not going to be another $102 million sitting in an account. The last slide, it's my wrap up. It is, this is a vehicle, as I mentioned, to promote and stimulate the economic development within the community. Again, a city statutorily prohibited from using its taxation to pay the bonds, and the city does not guarantee anything. Again, that's pretty high level stuff. We could get down in the weeds. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, because we really want to make certain that you understand this type of finance and the reasons why we're doing it, the need, while we'll talk about, and the need why we have to increase from $50 million to $102 million. I'm happy to answer any questions associated with this presentation.
Okay. Ms. Shadrich, go ahead.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So I'd love to meet the lobbyists that got this legislation passed. But in the simplest terms possible, tell me if this is correct. The city this money, $102 million, is not coming out of city coffers.
That's correct.
It comes from a bond issue from a third party?
The city is the issuer. The city is an issuer. The money, if there is truly a purchase, and I guess maybe the answer is the bond purchaser effectively would be paying that $102 million.
Okay. And our job as the city is to essentially say, yes, you can issue and pay these bonds. And it all goes through the trustee after we do the lease exchange.
That's correct.
Okay. So our responsibility is not financial in that we don't pay anything for this.
Actually, the statute provides we're prohibited from paying anything.
Okay. So when someone's looking at the budget for this project and they see that it goes up by $52 million, the budget is not going up by $52 million in terms of what the city is putting out.
That's correct.
Okay. And then who is functioning as our trustee for this?
I don't think we've selected a trustee. Typically, it doesn't have to be a local bank, but it's Security Bank of Kansas City, BOKF, UMB are the typical ones that we see. We sometimes see out-of-state trustees, but more often than not, it's usually Security Bank, UMB, or BOKF.
Okay. And one last follow-up. So the only thing the city would potentially miss out on is the sales tax if something were purchased within the city limits.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, there's destination rules.
Well, or,
sourcing.
yeah.
Yeah, but effectively, we're losing, and the city would be losing the sales tax. And Jeff, Mr. White.
Sales tax on materials and that kind of stuff for the
That's
development itself. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Silvers, go ahead.
Thanks. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So my question goes a little bit beyond what you presented here. So it seems like the term of the IRB will actually extend beyond the expiration of our TIF district. Are they independent?
They are. They absolutely are. In fact, yeah, that's a great question, because our district, I think, is set to expire in 2032. For property tax abatements, in order to get to maximize the value, we will not issue for the apartments until further down the road. Otherwise, the value of the abatement shrinks, because we're taxing dirt effectively. Whereas if they're construction and it's almost done, then there would be full assessed value. So yeah, this effectively does extend beyond the term of the TIF, but the TIF doesn't extend any further.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Mr. Neal?
Yeah, I actually have a few questions. First of all, it was a good presentation. I wish we'd have seen this presentation before we voted on the earlier votes, but the first question, since we were already talking about the trustee, well, let me back up a minute. Let me see if I understand this. Essentially, what I think this all means is that, and see if I'm right, the statute provides for cities to bless the issuance of bonds that essentially finance the project up to, we thought 50 million or whatever, now it's 102 million. So we're providing a financial vehicle that the developer can use to borrow the money to build the project. And the mechanics of how it works are essentially that, as you stated, there's a little bit of complexity there, but the trustee is essentially providing all the financial services necessary to issue and administer the bonds and the payments and the distribution of funds and so forth. I assume there's a fee for that.
Yes,
And what is the cost for the trustee, and how is that different from if the developer went straight to the bank and tried to borrow the $102 million?
Yeah, so the first answer is the trustee will have a fee. It'll depend on which trustee is selected. Let's just say typically it's a setup fee of anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 per series, and then they'll have an annual fee of about $500 or so per year. And it's important to know that it's really good. It's really the $102 million. While it may not be wholly borrowed, there is going to be an outside lender associated with this. So let's just make it a real quick example, a simple example. Let's assume that that $102 million is actually borrowed from the bank. The developer or the purchaser of the bonds, if it were not the developer, would actually have to pay $102 million to buy the bonds. So what we do is we structure this as what we call a drawdown with an element of a reimbursement. So the developer will draw on its construction loan and then will effectively requisition for reimbursement those costs that are associated with the construction. And when you requisition, then effectively it draws down the bonds, or the amount of bonds that are outstanding increase.
Okay, so I guess the next part of my trying to understand this fully is that so this as the costs, as essentially the bond is the money's the bond's being purchased, but it's not, if I understand you, it's not really fully purchased all at once. It's purchased a little bit at a time. Is that where the series that you're talking about, the trustee issues series further, along the way, or is that money already just sitting there?
So the series will be a series of bonds for the commercial property. In this instance, but for the Merriam Grand Station, there will be a series of bonds for the commercial property. That's the area for the TIF, and that's the sales tax only. And then there's going to be a series of bonds, and it could be 2 series of bonds, one for each apartment, but there will not be more than 3 series of bonds. What we do is we provide the capacity in the issuance. Let's say that there's 9 million. I think it's 9 million for one series and 93 million for the other series. When we close, we have bond capacity in that amount. And then when they have eligible costs, they have costs that are associated with this project, they're already drawn on the construction loan. So we are effectively I don't want to say paper trail in it, but effectively documenting a reimbursement of costs that were necessary for whether it's sales tax exemption or the amount that goes into the value of the property for the abatement.
Okay, so the portion that's the public financing is essentially that a portion of the tax that would be an operational cost of the project is abated if it's property tax and sales tax as well. That piece is much less than the cost, but we're still, the bonds are issued for the, a much broader amount of cost than the piece that is essentially the public financing portion. Is that not correct?
That is absolutely correct. And the reason is, when you go to value, when you go to appraise real property, what is also included, and there was an omission on, what is also included for new construction is labor. But in order to get the value of the abatement, the entire project has to be financed with industrial revenue bonds. So if you only finance a portion of the project, then the business deal would be shrinking. And that's for abatements. For sales tax only IRBs, you have to size it necessary to buy the materials, not the savings on the sales tax savings, but the actual cost of the materials. So the public incentive is the savings on sales tax in the entirety of the development, as well as the property tax abatement for the 2 apartments.
Okay. Now, since the payments of these bonds are based on essentially paying these lease payments back, if for some reason the economics don't work out and the developer is unable to generate enough revenue to pay those bonds back in the time frame that was envisioned, and I assume that there's some interest on those bonds, and that'll probably be determined based on when they go to market. But what happens? I mean, you got to think of the worst case as in the city. What happens? What actually happens in that case?
There are 2 distinguishing scenarios that I need to address in that question, if I may, Councilmember Neal. Understand in the first instance that the developer is the bond owner, and the developer is an obligated tenant, and the obligated tenant has to make sufficient debt service payments to the trustee to pay itself. So when we do these developer-owned bonds, it's a really unique situation because effectively they're paying themselves. And so if they failed to make a payment to themselves, then yes, they can call a default, but typically they wouldn't call a default on themselves. We have to contrast that is if we actually had a lender that purchased the bonds, and maybe it's easy if we make this distinguishing factor, but if a lender actually is financing this, not as a construction loan, but as a purchase of the bonds, then in that instance, let's say it's Commerce Bank or Enterprise Bank, they will actually, if in a true financing, they would actually at closing, just like we do with our general obligation bonds, there would be actual monies, $102 million in this instance, sitting in a project fund with the bond trustee. If the tenant fails to make a payment, a lease payment necessary to debt service those bonds, then the lender would call a default, and then they could take over the project. They would be in here asking for consent rights. And honestly, you could default them and say, we don't want to go down with this abatement any longer. We did not negotiate this with the lender. We gave this to this particular developer, and he failed to develop, if that's in fact the case, or if it's started to spiral and he can't debt service for whatever reason, then we could either consent to an assignment to the lender, or we can default them, and then the property goes back on the tax rolls.
Okay, so I got just 2 more, but I keep having more questions.
Absolutely.
So essentially, what we're going through, if to cut to the chase, is we're going through this sort of shifting money around on essentially the principal of the principal financing in order to be able to get the abatement pieces. And that's really the whole reason that we're doing this. We are getting, this is, the complex financing is sort of a pass-through, other than it gets you also the tax abatement off of the operating expenses. So that, is that kind of really what we're doing?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's an odd structure. The complexities are there, but it's necessary for statute in order to get an abatement and a sales tax exemption on
Okay.
materials. That's right.
My last one for right now is the cost-benefit analysis is a statutory requirement. And as I said in the previous council meeting, I was concerned about the cost-benefit analysis because my own analysis questioned that. And I'm obviously not, I don't have access to the detail that you have. Are we going to see that and have an explanation of that?
Absolutely. I think we'll have, the mayor will open up a public hearing. Mr. White will come and present the cost-benefit analysis, and then you can ask questions associated with that cost-benefit analysis. It should be noted in my materials that I didn't highlight because it's not really a factual statement. What is required is that the city, you know, conduct a public hearing and prepare a cost-benefit analysis. What is not required in statute, which is very interesting, is that it doesn't have to show a positive cost-benefit ratio. It just has to be performed. But it would be really interesting for a city to approve an abatement whereby the overall costs to the various taxing jurisdictions exceeds the benefit. And I don't think you will see that in our cost-benefit analysis, but I wanted to make that clarity because it's a little intricate portion of the IRB Act. It just has to be performed.
I think that's important also because obviously cost-benefit, you can take it out so far into the future to make it turn a positive number. It depends on how long of a period you're looking at, and you know, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, you can, you know, make it look however you want. And what's reasonable, those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to look at. So anyway, thank you.
My pleasure.
Does anyone have any? Okay, Mr. Silvers. Oh, no, Mr. Cuttle. Go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. I just need some clarity. In the presentation.
Can you turn on your microphone?
I'm sorry. In the presentation, it stated that the city issues the bonds, and while the bonds are outstanding, the city owns the project and leases it back to the developer. What does the city really own?
It either owns the project or a leasehold interest in the project. So effectively, the base lease, the city receives a leasehold interest in the land and the improvements. And then the city then leases the land improvements and future improvements back to the developer. So in this instance, and how we're going to structure these, is that we will structure them as a leaseback, whereby the city owns a leasehold interest, as opposed to before, I think, 2013, the city actually had to take fee title to the property. Okay. So in the earlier days, you know, 10 years ago, the city would receive fee title to the property and then lease it back, the land and improvements. But they changed the law, I want to say in 2012, going into 13, whereby the city now only needs to receive a leasehold interest in the property.
Okay, so we go down to the courthouse, we won't see our name there.
No, but there are a lot of cities around here that have issued debt, the IRBs, that actually still hold fee title. And when the tax bills come, they go to the city manager's office or the finance director's office, and they say, what do we do with them? And sometimes we're trying to find out where these people are, where these companies are. So a lot of the logistics kind of are eased by the way that the legislation modified it to allow for a lease.
Real quick, I'll just mention, we do have history with this already. Pine Gate Apartments is an IRB development, and it wasn't too many years ago where we had to go through the process of, they made all the payments, the IRBs needed to be closed down. So, well, it's been a number of years, we do have history in the city of Merriam with this type of development with IRBs.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Silvers.
I have a two-part question, which should be really quick. can the bond owner transfer ownership of the bond to another entity? And if so, do they have to do that? Do they have to come to the city council to do that?
They could, but yeah, it's consent rights. The city would have consent rights. And mainly, we want to have those consent rights because that bond actually is a live certificate. You know, we could talk about the dynamics. It's a live certificate. We want to make certain that we know actually who is the benefited party. And so there are consent rights within the indenture that, plus there's some SEC regulations that we want to make certain that we comply with the regulations. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, I see no other questions.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. At this point, we're going to open the public hearing. Is that correct, Director Dyer?
Yeah, it's time to open up the public hearing. Again, the public hearing is just for the issuance on the resolution for intent to issue the IRBs on the residential area, because the residential area is the part that has the property tax abatement, which is what the public hearing is about. And as we mentioned earlier, I know Mr. Jeff White with Columbia Capital, it will make his presentation regards to cost benefit once you open up the public hearing. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, we will open up the public hearing and have Mr. White address the council.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Jeff White with Columbia Capital. We serve as the city's financial advisor. Don't you wish Joe's presentation were about 67 more slides long? I want to start, so he's gone through that entire presentation to get exactly, Councilmember Neal, to the point that you made, that we wave our hands and do a lot of paperwork and pay some bond lawyers, and what we end up with is a property tax abatement and an exemption on sales tax for construction materials during the construction of the project. So I'd like to start, I'm going to take just 30 seconds and explain to you why the increase in the amount of the authorization for the bonds doesn't impact the business deal that you all approved back in July. And the reason for that is that when we look at the analysis of what the incentive package will cost the public, I don't look at all the hand waving that Joe just talked about with the issuance of the bonds and all this, that, and the other. I look at the effect, and the effect is the value of the property tax abatement. The value of the property tax abatement is based upon the eventual value of the project itself. We used data provided by the developer and data from other comparable projects in the area to determine what that value would be and thus what the value of the abatement would be. It doesn't matter whether the bonds are $1 million or $1 billion. What matters to us is the value of what that project will be when it's built, because that's the ultimate driver of the value of the property tax abatement. So when Joe mentioned in his presentation that the increase in the authorization for the bonds was really just a mechanic to make sure that we complied with the statute that requires us to run all costs through the IRB bonds for statutory compliance purposes to grant that abatement. I wanted to explain why that was. So my real purpose is to talk about the cost-benefit analysis. As Joe mentioned, this is a statutory requirement. It's been around for about 30 years at this point. And the key point Joe made, I want to reiterate, the statute requires that a cost-benefit analysis be done. It requires us to look at the costs and the benefits to any city affected, any school district affected, any county affected, and then also to look at the impact on state revenues. And so the cost-benefit analysis in your packet today addresses that statutory constraint. It does not, again, require a specific outcome. And I want to tell you why I think that's important, because although it sounds odd to stand here and tell you that my analysis is flawed, it is. And anyone who's doing a cost-benefit analysis for any period of time is going to have flaws just fundamentally in the way that these things are constructed. So I'm going to start with the punchline, which is that our calculations show, based upon the developer data and the assumptions that we use, that the project over the 10-year calculation period is expected to provide a net positive benefit on a present value basis, so time discounted basis, for all of the city, the county, and Shawnee Mission schools. The state is expected, however, to have a negative net impact to its revenues, which isn't terribly surprising, primarily because we are providing an exemption from the construction sales tax, which is the key way the state's going to derive direct benefit from this project. The one thing that we don't look at with respect to the state is the impact that might come indirectly from payroll taxes and things like that. So that's really the first piece of information that I want to share, is that our cost-benefit analysis methodology looks only at the direct first-generational costs and benefits from the project. So we're looking at what is the value of sales taxes that might be derived on the purchases from this business. We're not then taking that one generation further to say, well, if there's a lot of new purchases in the community, then the people working at those stores that are benefiting from those purchases are going to make more money, and they're going to buy more Big Macs, and therefore McDonald's is going to make more money, and they're going to hire more people, and then other people are going to get new jobs. We stop at that first generation. And other folks' cost-benefit analyses, you'll hear input-output types of things, or indirect or induced benefits. We don't calculate any of those. Not denying that they probably occur, but I joked with Brian that if you took the leading software that does that kind of analysis and you plugged the Earth's economy into it, it would tell you that the Earth's economy is about 7 times what it really is, because of those induced benefits and the spin-offs that come from that. The second key piece of information that I want to share with you is that the right way to do this would be to calculate marginal costs and marginal benefits. So what's a marginal cost? So let's take an example of needing to hire more police officers. So at some point, the community will grow to the point where it needs another police officer. How many more households, businesses do we have to add before we add another police officer? Chances are if we add one more household, it won't make any difference to the material difference to the number of police calls. We're probably fine. At 10 households, are we still fine? Yeah, probably in a community this size. 100, maybe. Let's just say that on the 143rd new household, all of a sudden, police calls have risen to the point where the chief shows up and says in budget time, I got to have new bodies. We're responding to all these calls. So if we use a marginal cost approach, the projects that generate the first 142 new households in the community show 0 marginal cost to the police department. The project that then walks in and generates that 143rd new household in the community is then responsible for the marginal cost of 100% of a new police officer. That is both sort of impossible to calculate. If you think about every city service you provide, maybe it's 143 new households to get to a new police officer. Maybe it's 1,000 new households before you need a snowplow. You can just sort of think about the challenge of doing all this. And it's also sort of then a luck of the draw situation. So Matt Pennington walks in with Merriam Grand Station, and we say, nope, no impact on cops. And then the next developer walks in, and all of a sudden, you know, they're hit with 100% of the cost of a new police officer. So the fix to this is that we use an average cost methodology. So we're basically taking your city budget, we're dividing it by the number of people that live here today to come up with an average cost value. And if Merriam Grand Station generates new citizens to Merriam, we are tacking on that average amount, that average new cost of being a resident of Merriam onto each one of those new entities or new individuals. The impact of that, we think, for any given project is that we're overstating costs. And so I don't really have a better way to get to that. We could probably look retrospectively and determine. We could look at all the projects that have come into the community for the last 20 years and sort of figure it out when we added those additional public service costs on top of that. But looking prospectively, which this is, what we're using a marginal cost basis. Same thing on the revenue side. We are looking at sort of average statistics of what is an average household's purchase. We ask the developer to make estimates of how much of the purchasing for their business, both during construction and ongoing, will happen in Merriam, will happen in Johnson County, will happen in the state of Kansas. we're obviously going to lose. We're close enough to being a border community. We're going to lose, certainly we're going to lose purchases to Missouri, purchases to the internet, those kinds of things as well. So I mentioned at the very beginning, our analysis is fundamentally flawed, and I freely admit that, and you can see the limitations in the letter that we provide. But we think, on average, and considering this in the spirit that it's given, which is, again, as one tool of many to help you make a decision about whether or not to grant an incentive, that it is instructive here. So last couple comments I wanted to make, and then certainly, Mr. Mayor, happy to try to answer any questions that folks might have, is if you look at the summary page and the cost-benefit analysis, you'll notice that the net benefit between the city, county, and school district vary pretty significantly. So why is that? Well, the first thing is, with respect to the school district, there was a legislative change in 2017 that no longer permits us to abate the capital mill levy for the school district, which is 8 mills. And so they get a pass-through of the 8 mills from this project that are never abated. So we talk about 100% abatement, but we never truly have 100% abatement because there's 8 mills that can't ever be abated. The other thing is, if you think about the way that schools in Kansas and in most states are funded, it's really capitated. It's based upon the number of students that they have fundamentally. And so to the extent that this project drives new students, the revenue to the school district will grow. Its costs will grow as well, but it's getting revenues that way. The county generally generates revenue in a couple ways, but primarily through property tax. The city has a lot of other ways that it can capture revenues from a particular project. Certainly property tax, sales tax for sure, franchise fees, and that will be an important factor here. Apartments use a lot of gas and electric and trash and cable, and the city's generating, I think, 5% on most of those utilities' gross receipts, income from franchise fees on that. And then we have other types of things, transient guest taxes, so to the extent that this project or any project generates heads on beds for hotels, the city's also benefiting from transient guest dollars as well. So, Mr. Mayor, with that, I'm going to stop talking about this and try to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Mr. White? Yes, Mr. Neal.
Okay. For some reason, I can't pull this, haven't been able to pull this up on my copy, but in your, okay, the cost-benefit analysis, what did you come up with as the portion of revenue that is going to offset the, the lost revenue from sales tax during the 10-year period and also from franchise fees? What's our total of revenue that's actually going to, additional revenue, incremental revenue that's going to come to the city to cover what I believe to be, and I'm sure you calculated this because you said you were not doing it on the 143rd, apartment.
Right.
But, and you're doing it on a per resident basis. What, I did this back of the envelope calculation a few weeks ago and came up with a shortage, but I wasn't considering the franchise fees. So I would be, could you kind of go down in the weeds a little bit and show me where, for the city, where the additional revenues from this project are going to offset the costs of
Sure.
the additional operating costs for the city?
Sure. So the first point I want to make starts in the middle here, which is the construction sales tax abatement. So the exemption is only on construction materials. We are not providing an ongoing exemption of sales tax income that's generated by the project. So in this case, we have an apartment project that's going to have purchases, cleaning supplies and landscaping equipment and all the other things that an apartment complex with 350 units will have to purchase over time to keep up the appearance, to meet the needs of its residents, those kinds of things. We'll be generating sales taxes on that. So that is an ongoing revenue stream over the 10-year period of the calculation of the cost-benefit analysis. You mentioned franchise fees. That's a pretty significant revenue source in this particular case. If you think about the amount of utilities that will be generated from an apartment complex, it's significant in this particular case. We also have, as I mentioned, there's an assumption in here, which you can see at the bottom. It's just below the slide, as you can see it there, that we will have some new residents in the community. Those folks are presumed to generate property taxes and also sales taxes and those kinds of things as well. So again, first generation impacts are calculated here. Back up to the top on the left-hand side, you can see the calculation of the value that we've assumed for the property tax abatement, which is, Joe talked about his glasses being a problem, $590,000 a year. In value, again, that is across all taxing jurisdictions. The city is, what, roughly a fifth of that, something like that. So the burden that the city would have to overcome is really, you know, about $120,000 a year. And so we're presuming that, so the first thing to note is the developer will be paying what's called a payment in lieu of taxes. So all the hand waving Joe did, what that does is it takes the property off the tax roll. So by definition, every abatement in Kansas is 100%. We can then negotiate by contract the ability to reduce the value to the developer of that abatement. They've agreed in this case to pay about $25,000 a year in payment in lieu of tax. That number is magic. It goes back to the first year that the TIF district was created, 1994, and it tries to give taxing jurisdictions the value of the taxes on this piece of the project that they got on that particular date. So the city will get a few $1,000s a year from that 25,000, and then we build from there with the other revenue streams that I mentioned.
Okay, so again, just to kind of clarify some of the numbers that I've been looking at, if, first of all, because we put it in the I-35 TIF district, we use the payment in lieu of taxes on the base tax in 1994, which is not the same as the base tax before the beginning of this project, like a year ago.
Sure.
So there's actually it's not a full payment in lieu, you know, for the other taxing jurisdictions.
Agreed.
Just want to point that out because I think there's a problem with putting projects in the I-35 TIF district for just that reason. Second thing is that a question, just to clarify, the sales tax exemption, does that apply to the commercial businesses in the project, the restaurants, for example? Are we?
The sales tax exemption inures to the developer while they're constructing the project.
Right.
So once the project is constructed, those sales tax IRBs, they actually go away.
Right. So I guess my question is, I didn't hear you talk about the the sales tax portion that's coming back to the city from the economic activity of the commercial portion of the restaurants, for example, in this. Did you do that? Was that analysis?
Not included in here, but if you go back to the financial analysis you reviewed with the TIF approval back in July, city code requires, or city policy requires, a cost-benefit analysis. And so we estimated the value of what those commercial sales taxes would be worth to the city. That's not included here.
Okay, so that's a different cost-benefit analysis.
Correct.
Okay. Boy, it's kind of hard to get your hands around the whole thing because we're talking about the value, tax abatement value under the IRBs of, if I remember correctly, $9 to $10 million or something like that. 4.5 million, not 9 million. Yeah, 4.5. The two different components, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, it's roughly $6 million on the property side, and it could be on a project this size, $3 million
Right.
on the sales tax.
And there's a lot of variables in all these kind of economic analysis, such as what is the future value of commercial properties. As we know, they've been, residential has been going way up much faster than commercial, and so I know that's a guess as well. And then it sounds like there's quite a bit of projection here of, where these residents are going to buy their, or whoever is going to be, when the project's up and running, the sales tax generated is, we don't know that they're going to buy it from Merriam. The restaurants, however, we do know
Right.
are in Merriam and subject to sales tax.
But we don't know how many people who live in the apartments are going to use the restaurants.
Correct.
And how many
Yeah.
times you're going
No,
to go and buy a
right.
meal there.
No,
where we're, we don't
Yeah,
want to double count that. Yeah.
it's kind of magic, I understand. The bottom line is, for me, looking at the cost of city services for maybe 500-600 new residents doesn't seem to be supported by the additional economic activity of the sales tax in the restaurants. And I don't know, I haven't really seen anything here that addresses that particular question, so.
It's a fair criticism. Again, this cost-benefit analysis relates solely to the abatement on the residential components of the project only. So I'd refer you back to that other cost-benefit analysis, the longer, more detailed one, more narrative one that we performed in compliance with city policy related to the TIF item. And we did work closely with city staff to go through and say, do we think there'll be additional police calls or fire calls or those kinds of things? And again, no one knows for sure, right, till we get there?
So on the TIF side, we're doing the other type of analysis than we are here, right? So we're the incremental. We did that on the TIF side. Now we're doing it the other way here. So it's kind of like, to me, a little bit of inconsistency. Anyway.
It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I will tell you the conclusions of staff were incrementally there would be very little new cost from this project. So if anything, again, we've overstated and maybe make my point that I made earlier. The costs that are embedded in this particular analysis that you see tonight are probably overstated.
And this is, in fact, the property tax abatement analysis for that piece of it, and not the other analysis that applies to the TIF side of it. So it's kind of like, to me, it's picking and choosing your method that gives you the right answer, or the best answer, let me put it that way.
I will say this, that the methodology that you see here tonight, we use for every community we do this with in Kansas, which is, I don't know, more than a dozen probably. And it hasn't changed materially in about 15 years. So if you pick one from Topeka or you pick one from Edgerton or whatever, it'll look similar to this, and the methodology will be consistent. You can tell me it's wrong, and I'm probably not going to argue with you.
I understand that that's how it's being done, but I think a lot of people don't understand how it's being done, and that's why it's being done that way, because I think there are some inconsistencies. And personally, I'd like to see this changed in a much broader sense than what we had just Merriam. So I think these projects need to be done in a way that the true economics for the residents of the community are fairly assessed, and because the benefit's going to private developers and their investors, so not the taxpayers.
It's fair, and I wish we could get there too. I will say I think it's very, very challenging.
Yeah, I think we have, Ms. Aldridge, you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that Councilmember Neal has enough information in order to move on and allow the public to speak, in addition to having enough information to cast a vote. Thank
I think
you.
he's ready, okay. Does anyone have any other questions for Mr. White? Okay.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And I assume, Director Dyer, we would call the public to see if there's anyone from the public.
Yeah, you have already opened up the public hearing, so yes, anybody from the general public like to speak, be the time.
Is there anyone out in the audience that would like to address the council or have any questions that haven't been answered to your satisfaction at this point? Please come forward, sir, and give your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Billy Crone, 6633 Wed Street. The RDA was signed July 11th, 2 meetings ago. In addition to over $25 million of direct funding from city accounts, another 10 in various tax abatements and city fee waivers, and other benefits, the city of Merriam already decided to issue IRBs in the amount of $50 million. That's pretty generous if you ask me. Not a brick has been laid and barely a month passed, and the developer is coming back because they forgot to include all the labor costs in their budget. And that demonstrates faulty project management to me. $52 million faulty. What else did they forget? Such incredible sums of money shuffling hither and thither under our name feels very suspicious to me. That diagram was a lot. I'm left wondering if this is really how IRBs were supposed to be used, or is this some sort of loophole? They're paying us and giving us a lease interest so we can give them the same money back. If I didn't know any better, I'd think that was some sort of scheme to evade taxes. And indeed, assisting the developer evade taxes is a large part of this deal. I'm not comfortable with my city being party to $52 million more of that, especially not the same night that council will very likely approve the largest property tax hike in my lifetime on our residents, on your neighbors, in just a few minutes in the same room. If we approve this amendment tonight, what are they going to come back for next month? I think we should say no before this gets more out of hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crone. Okay, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come forward and have any questions or comments? Okay. Seeing nobody rushing forward, I think it's appropriate to close the public meeting at this point. Are we ready to move on, Mr. Dyer, to the...
And that you close the public hearing, your next item is the consideration of the amendment to the redevelopment agreement.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to consider approval of an amendment to the redevelopment agreement with Merriam Grand Station LLC for the Merriam Grand Station Development Project. Ms. Hands.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approve the First Amendment to the redevelopment agreement for the Merriam Grand Station redevelopment project, amending Section 6.02 of the original agreement, and to authorize you, the mayor, to sign the amended agreement.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Ms. Shadrich.
Mr. Mayor, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
I'm going to vote no because I still don't think this project makes economic sense for the residents. I just haven't seen it.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-1.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, Director Dyer. and
Sure,
next.
sure. Your next item is to consider approval of a resolution of the intent to issue IRBs to facilitate the property tax abatement and sales tax exemption on the construction materials for the residential portion of the Merriam Grand Station development. So, again, as I mentioned, Mr. Serrano's mentioned, there's 2 series that are going to be issued on this IRB. So this is the first issuance, the first series of IRBs issuance.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Okay, I entertain a motion. Ms. Shadrich, was that? Go ahead.
Take it, sure. Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approve the resolution of intent to issue federally taxable private activity revenue bonds, industrial revenue bonds, in the principal amount not to exceed $93 million for the residential portion of the Merriam Grand Station development.
Do we have a motion? We have a second? Okay. Did you want it?
Mr. Mayor, I'll second.
Ms. Shavetta, go, seconds. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Nay.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-1.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
And then the last one is the second series that we discussed for the commercial. This is just for sales tax exemption on the construction materials used for the construction of the commercial portion of the project.
Thank you, Director Dyer. I entertain a motion. Ms. Hands. Oh, no, wait. Sorry, Mr. Leahy.
I move that the council approve of the resolution of intent to issue federally taxable private activity revenue bonds, industrial revenue bonds in the principal amount not to exceed $9 million for the commercial portion of the Merriam Grand Station development.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. Ms. Shadrich.
Mr. Mayor, I second.
Okay. Our motion second, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Leahy?
Aye.
Councilmember Neal?
Aye.
Councilmember Ryder?
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers?
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich?
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta?
Aye.
Councilmember Hands?
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell?
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, looks like our next item of business this evening is council items. And I think we're going to go to amendment to the shared parking. Okay. Looks like we're getting ready to address. Thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you. Good evening. Jennifer Jones-Lacey, and I'm just here to actually introduce folks from the library and give you a little overview of what you're about to hear tonight. The library has a brief presentation for you, about 5 slides or so, where they're going to talk a little bit about the 2 items: the amendment to the shared parking plaza and property maintenance agreement with the library, between the city and the library, as well as the second addendum to the property conveyance agreement. And these are 2 agreements that need to be approved by you all for them to move in and for us to make sure that we have a shared understanding of what the maintenance is going to be. There have been a couple of changes to these agreements, which have been outlined in your packet, but I'm actually going to turn it over to Jennifer Menken from the library, and she is going to give you an overview. You should be able to get slides with this thing.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome, Ms. Megan.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Munkin. I am the interim deputy county librarian. I apologize that our county librarian couldn't be here tonight. She's at the county at the public hearing for the budget, so I am standing in her place. With me tonight, I am joined by our board chair, David Sims, our vice chair, Kelly Kilgore, Fred Logan, our attorney, Mr. Scott Syme as our project coordinator, and Juan Lopez Tamez as our facilities representative for the project. First, I just wanted to thank you all for your time this evening. This is a project that's been in the works for several years, and it's great to see it finally coming to fruition. We were last in front of you in April, and we wanted to bring you some updates and talk through some of the changes that are happening. We are excited to be working with you all and appreciate your vision in this project as we move forward. All right, so we will be talking about our design updates and reviewing the revisions coming forward. I think I will just go to our images real quickly. So we wanted to share some updates to the design. This is a view from Slater Street. You will notice our welcoming front porch, our innovative green roof, and the light monitors on the roof to let in more light into the building. This is a view from the community center entrance looking across the plaza at the library. You'll see some landscaping updates and in between trying to bring both of the buildings more tied closer together. This is a view from the south looking at the drive-through area. And I think that's all the pictures we have. So I will invite Mr. Syme forward to talk through some of the changes to the addendums.
Thank you.
Hello, council people. I'm Scott Syme with the library. I'll talk about the property conveyance first. So just a few changes there since the last time you all saw it. The first one is the size of the buildings fluctuated a bit, and we're now at approximately 15,000 square feet. We're not reducing services to this building. The size is comparable to the public footprint of the existing library now. With our recent renovation at Central, a lot of our support services that used to be housed out of Antioch just aren't there anymore. And we have a couple of other partners that are at the current building that won't be joining us at the new building, the Friends Bookstore and the JCCC Adult Ed. Another change to the property conveyance agreement is our petitioning area. So we need to have a petitioning area by policy. This is a place the library provides at all of our locations for citizens to demonstrate peacefully and picket. It's rarely used, but it is used occasionally. We know the community center serves as a polling place, and we recently changed our policy regarding elections to be able to move or close that petitioning area so that it doesn't cause our patrons who use that area to not be in compliance with state electioneering law. The last bit on the property conveyance is a revised legal description and replat. So we worked with the Planning Commission and went ahead and replatted. And now that we've done that, we just needed to change the legal description and the diagram in the agreement. So that's it on the property conveyance. And then the last bit, switch my pages here, is about the another agreement that we're both a party to, which is our shared parking plaza and property maintenance agreement. So we have some updated language in there regarding sharing of costs for utilities. We've also revised the size of the parcel of land to be conveyed and that square footage again. And then the last one is location for electric vehicle charging stations in the parking structure. And with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions. We also have a very good team here that I might call on to.
Okay, Mr. Silvers, go ahead.
I have a few questions. So with the Johnson County Community College pulling out as a partner in this, does that mean that the English as a second language program will leave the library?
So right now we dedicate space to the, we have certain space that they're able to use for that program, and we won't have that dedicated space for them at the new library.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question has to do with the shared parking. So there will be an addition to the parking by adding charging stations, but I don't really see an addition to handicap parking. I see that as a concern. I also am somewhat concerned with the drop-off, how it's in this plan, and I brought this up last time we talked about this. The entrance to the parking garage and the entrance to the community center in general is very tight already. And this adds a lot of additional points of entry to a very, what could become a very congested intersection. And at one point I felt like we were told that there were probably going to be handicap parking spaces somewhere alongside of the library itself. So, I mean, I know we're really far into this and probably nothing's going to change, but I just wanted to point out that this is a concern of mine that I feel like there's going to be a traffic issue and a bit of a parking issue for people with disabilities.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the ADA first. So the parking structure is not the library's property. And if we need to go ahead and, if the city would like to go ahead and add more ADA stalls, they could. I think what you're talking about with maybe a previous iteration of this plan where it showed some parking next to the building, that was like I said, a previous iteration from maybe 2017, 18, and the design's just evolved since then. Yeah.
Thank you.
We did, it might be worth mentioning too that we've been working really closely with the city and our architecture firm to be able to make sure that the clearances and the visibility around the drive-through is appropriate. So we feel pretty good about that.
Ms. Ryder?
With construction material, in regards to construction material, this space is very limited. So I was just wondering, do you know or anyone know where things are going to be stored, tools, equipment, things like that, and if we're going to continue having access to the parking garage?
Yeah, that's a good question too. We've talked a little bit about the laydown area for construction. At the locations escaping me right now. Maybe Juan can give me an answer for that one.
It is, yeah, it's right across the street. It's the area, it's up on the upper part of the area that's up there, that's over here. It's in the It's in one of the agreements. I believe it's actually marked out as an exhibit in that agreement where it's at. But it's right across the street, the upper area. It's grassed in right now, so that's where it's going to be located at.
Thank you.
So the important part is that the laydown area is not going to be on the parking structure.
We also have a big lot next behind the BMW that will serve for the Titan station and all the materials.
Thanks, Juan.
Ms. Shedridge.
Do we anticipate closing one of the entrances, either on Slater or IKEA Way, to the community center during construction?
We want to work as closely as we can with the city to make sure that you understand the impacts for our work and that we're giving you as much advance notice as we can. So I'm sure there will be times when we need to close those entrances. I don't think that we're going to close them for the whole duration, close one of them for the whole duration.
Okay. The residents who live along Slater have gone through a lot of construction over a lot of years, and I hope they get a little break from that while this is going on, especially because they've been getting a lot of debris on their streets, the loud noises, etc. So if there's a way around that, that's great. The other thing I wanted to say is there might be an opportunity here for traffic enforcement on that three-way stop sign that leads into the parking garage on the lower level, because those stop signs are not observed by people who are driving through. And I am also concerned about the drive-through lane coming through there with people coming around that corner, specifically from IKEA Way down. So that's more of a comment for the city, but I'm not going to say I work out a lot, but I go up to the gym 3 or 4 days a week, and it's consistently an issue. So that is a shared sentiment, Jason.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Neal.
I don't know if this is if you're addressing this in this presentation, one of the, but I think so, one of the portions of one of the changed agreements, it has to do with the shared use of the plaza area. Is that this one, or is that in another presentation?
That's this one.
Okay. Can you explain kind of how what constitutes the plaza precisely, and how again are we envisioning this interaction between the community center and the library for use of this space, which I don't know whether it's shared space or whether the city owns that. I think is it mostly city space?
It's city. Yeah.
It's the courtyard, right?
Right. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about that. So we have talked with the city's professional staff about being able to work together to schedule and advance that space. So if the city has a big event, we would steer clear of it for our events, and if we can get the city enough notice to be able to use that space, then we would use that space for that time. Yeah. Does that
So
answer the
basically,
question?
the city has priority on the use of the space, or is there some
Well, we're agreeing to
process?
cooperate on being able to schedule it in advance.
What was the need to change the agreement? What was
So,
in there before? Or is
really,
that just clarification?
This is really for the plaza and programming and scheduling specifically. This is just more detail than was in previous agreements.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, I see no other questions. Thank you. Well, at this point, I think I would entertain a motion maybe for an amendment for the shared parking. Ms. Shedridge.
Mr. Mayor, I move the council approve the amendment to the parking, plaza, and property maintenance agreement with Johnson County Library.
Okay, we have a motion. I have a second. Ms.
Mr. Mayor,
Sands.
I'll second that.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Neal?
Aye.
Councilmember Ryder?
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers?
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge?
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta?
Aye.
Councilmember Hands?
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell?
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy?
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I guess with this Director, I guess we assume we were going to the Second Amendment addendum. We have a, yeah, I'm just, trying to see whether we have.
Well, the
this in
first one that we just discussed was the plaza parking property maintenance, and then we have to do the second addendum presentation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I would entertain a motion for the,
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Haynes.
I move that the council approve the second addendum to the property conveyance agreement for the Johnson County Library branch in Merriam.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second? Mr. Silvers.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
I missed that one. Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay. Yeah, we were, Council President and I were just discussing a motion that we might have missed earlier on, which one? No, we haven't
We're
got to
not
that
there
one
yet.
We're not to that one.
Yep.
No. Okay, that one's coming.
There was a change to
We
the
moved
agenda
that.
order.
That's
Sorry.
what it was, okay.
Time to update my sheet.
Yeah. Okay, no, I think, thank you, all you library people for attending and looking forward to moving forward with this project. Yeah, it's like, I could remember all their names. Okay, so anyway, Captain Brokaw, are you going to address this next one? I think we've moved you to this particular. You're not going anywhere? Okay. Thank you. If you could come forward and tell us why you need these police vehicles. Okay.
All right, Chris Brokaw, I'm a major with the police department. I'm here tonight because Chief McLaughlin is not here, obviously. So I'm going to get right to the point. Mine's not going to be near as complicated as everything that you just heard, so I'm going to keep it real short and simple. The police department is requesting approval from the council to use contingency funds in the amount of $19,480 to order 3 new police Dodge Durango vehicles in 2022. In our 2022 budget, we had budgeted for 2 police vehicles and then for 1 administration vehicle. The police vehicles were $35,000 each. The administration vehicle was $28,000 for a total of $98,000 is what we had. What we're asking for now is an additional $19,480. The reason for that, and I'm not going to regurgitate everything off here, the reason for that is the price of the vehicles went up a little over $4,000 per vehicle. We would like to order a 3rd police vehicle this year instead of ordering the administration vehicle because vehicles, as you all probably already know, are next to impossible to get. The last 2 that we ordered, we had to wait 6 to 8 months to get them. So I'm a little concerned that if we don't order here soon when our window opens up, which is going to be here very, very quickly, and it's going to be open for a very short period of time, if we don't get an order put in and get that 3rd vehicle, I'm afraid that we're going to be way further behind in the curve on the vehicles for next year. And I'm also concerned if we wreck a vehicle or we get a vehicle, we have a couple vehicles well over 100,000 miles right now. If something happens to them, we can't get them fixed. We can't get another car right now. So that's what I'm asking for right now. What we're not going to do is order the admin vehicle this year. We're going to push it off to next year. Instead of ordering a patrol car next year, just order the admin vehicle. Instead, we have $42,000 budgeted next year for the police car. We would just in turn just order an admin vehicle instead of ordering a police car to offset that. So, anybody has any questions for me? I can explain it any further.
Ms. Ryder.
Does this include the cost of all the equipment that goes into the police vehicles?
Yes, it's the cost of all of it.
Mr. Silvers.
Just out of curiosity, does your fleet currently include Durangos, or is this going to be a new brand for you?
No, we do have some Durangos right now. So we're switching our fleet over. Our fleet right now is almost half and half Durangos and Ford Explorers. So we're switching over to the Durangos. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Yodrich.
This is likely more of a question for Donna, but have we spent out of any contingency fund this year? And if so, how much is remaining in that fund? Because I know we're pulling a little bit from that to get all of these into this year and not put ourselves at risk.
We have not used any contingency fund out of the equipment reserve fund, which is where this would come from. And that has a contingency of about 900,000. So we would still have an ample reserve in there.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions? I'll look this way because they've been, Mr. Caldwell? Okay.
Yeah, while Donna's available, how does this impact next year's budget?
Next year's budget, I mean, we have in there the patrol vehicles since this kind of happened at the last edge of it. So their budget will be underspent
Okay.
by that
Will that go
amount.
back into the contingency?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct. Mhm.
Any additional questions for Major Burkall?
You can wait till Donna sits back down then.
Yeah, any questions for Donna? She's almost back to her chair.
All right, thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, I would entertain a motion then. Ms. Hands?
I move that the council approve the purchase of 3 new police patrol vehicles.
Okay, Mr. Neal?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Looks like Director Dyer is coming to the podium, probably to talk about the franchise transfer agreement.
No.
I'm sorry, I was trying to
Okay.
be efficient, give their complaint.
Oh, okay.
I almost got bumped too.
Yeah, who would be addressing that?
I will be addressing that.
Okay. Please sit down, Director Dyer. You're up next. Okay.
And I'm just going to do it from here since I'll have to take the vote really quick afterward.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
So the item before you tonight is a transfer franchise agreement between the city and Everfast Fiber Networks. So the city received notice back in June that Everfast was purchasing the customer base of Consolidated Communications, and they want to just basically transfer the agreement to the new user. The Consolidated, I think, operates under Everest Midwest is kind of what their brand is. And they do have a current franchise agreement with the city through the ordinance 1501, which we included in the packet. Because this ordinance 1501 is due to expire in 2023, the Everfast asked that we could just do a transfer agreement and then renegotiate the ordinance and the full franchise agreement next year. Our city's legal team worked with their legal team to kind of work all this out. These happen quite often. We've done several of them over the years. These companies buy up others and make transfers. So the important thing is that everything in the current franchise agreement gets transferred to the new company, including the 5% franchise fee revenue that the city receives from those gross receipts. And Section 12 in the ordinance has the whole language that allows this. So come next year, there'll be a ordinance and a franchise agreement coming before the council with Everfast. So it'll all be renegotiated next year. So this is just a basic transfer agreement. And I can answer any questions, or the city's legal representative is here as well, so.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Pinnick?
No, not for me.
Mr. Neal?
This is probably a distinction without a difference. You said that they purchased the customer base. Did they not purchase the corporation? Or is it because if the need for this, I would assume, is due to that it's a different corporate entity as opposed to them just purchasing the existing entity, which I would assume would then automatically include the current agreement.
So they ended up buying all right, title, and interest to the old entity's customer base. So they bought their infrastructure, their facilities, everything.
So then there's not a hanging liability out there though in the corporate sphere that would impact us in any way.
I don't know what that means. What
Yeah,
are we-
well, I mean, I just meant that, you know, if, yeah, it's not really important. You've answered my question, so.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion. Ms. Hands.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approve the transfer of telecommunication franchise agreement with Everfast Fiber Networks LLC.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second? Ms. Shadrich.
Mr. Mayor, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk.
Council, excuse me, Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
I'm definitely voting aye, and I'm also wanting to say for certain people who are in the audience that it's rather a walk down memory lane to see the original agreement dated April 25th, 2005.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Director Dyer, would you be coming forward for this next one, the Planning Commission?
Good evening, Mayor. Okay. Commissioners, Brian Dyer, Community Development Director again. Julie, could you?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Since we're having a little bit of difficulties with the
Oh, yes.
dais. So, this item, first of all, you're acting on one item in your consent agenda from the Planning Commission. These next two items are both related to the same request. Location is at 5820 Merriam Drive. I think we're all pretty familiar with it. That's the old school building built back in 1873, later became a Chevrolet automobile dealership, and then became the Pittman Moving Building. So a lot of us around City Hall still refer to it as the Pittman Building. But you see it up on the screen right now. The request is for rezoning from I-1, light industrial, to planning and development general, with some use restrictions, and they're also requesting a development plan with that. And then the next item, number 2, is the final plat that goes along with it. You can see up on your screen, the location is in downtown Merriam. The developments to the north are zone commercial and commercial retail commercial. To the east is also zone commercial, as well as uses of retail commercial, as well as to the south. And then to the west is Turkey Creek. This application is for a desire to expand the parking lot further to the north. Julie goes to the next slide, please. And so in order to facilitate, and one more after that, Julie.
One more, I'm sorry.
Yep, thank you. In order to facilitate that, requires a rezoning of planning and development general. This is very similar to a rezoning request that was a couple of years ago over at 5757 Merriam Drive. Obviously, a little bit about planning and development general zoning that allows the property owner developer to set their own standards for setbacks for buildings, parking lots, and things like that. And in exchange, the city gets the ability for a higher level of review on design, and really on zoning and on land uses in regards to that. So up on the screen right now is the current site as it is. You can see the building up there. It's if I had my pointer, actually, I think this one may. Excellent. So this is the building location right now. Merriam Drive is located out in front. Large amount of gravel drive right here, if you're familiar with it. Up here is the existing parking lot. And then a little bit further to the north is an alleyway. This is actually kind of probably looks a little bit like a street when you're up there, but it is paved, but it is public right of way, so it is an alley. And then further to the north is the restaurant Anita's further to the north. So over here is Turkey Creek. So if you go to the next slide. So this is what the property owner is proposing to develop. Again, existing pavement here, and then expand the parking lot, and then to pave in the gravel area right here. They will be putting a retention, not detention. I'll explain that in just a second. They'll be putting retention right here. There's no stormwater facilities currently on site. And then they'll be putting landscaping, perimeter landscaping around the parking lot and also along the front. And then there will be curb and guttering the entire parking lot. a number of benefits this provides for the area for downtown Merriam. If obviously off-street parking is something that downtown Merriam lacks, so this will be providing some more parking. Obviously, it is an automobile dealership, so they will have some display vehicles there. It does provide stormwater control. This site has no stormwater control currently, so it is going to be a retention pond, not a detention pond. There is a distinct difference between those two. A detention pond takes the water in and then lets it out in a controlled fashion. A retention pond lets the water in and it doesn't go out. It either evaporates or percolates back into the water. This provides another benefit on here. It does the best management practice. Obviously, containing the site on water on site does provide some water quality as well as quantity benefits. They did provide a stormwater analysis that was reviewed by the city engineer and accepted by the city engineer. And then also another positive that is a result of this project is the curb and guttering, particularly up here. There has been some issues between property owners in regards to exactly where this property line is. If you're over there, you cannot tell where the property line is at. So obviously, both this property owner as well as the property owner to the north use that alleyway as access to their business. So by putting in that curb and gutter, we will all know exactly where that property line is and where display vehicles should be at. So, and then the last thing about this is, again, it is zoned I-2, which is our most intensive zoning. So a lot of things can happen in I-2. With this rezoning request, staff is recommending that the use is restricted back to commercial 2 zoning, and with an additional restriction of no gas service stations. So the C2 zoning is what the surrounding area is zoned as well. It's our general retail zoning. So again, that's another positive benefit that we see from this proposal. Again, as I mentioned, it is a rezoning. As such, the golden factors need to be considered. They're contained within your staff report. Planning Commission did hold their public hearing on this. There was no comments at the public hearing for this item, and the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of this rezoning and the associated development plan with the conditions listed in the staff report. Applicant is here, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Ms.
Since
Haynes, go ahead.
one of the one of the restrictions was to accept delivery of vehicles not on Merriam Drive, but where do they get delivery now, and how will that change?
I believe they get delivery back here in the back right now. While it's not paved, I do believe that's where a lot of vehicle delivery is. I don't know if they get any specific car carriers per se. You guys don't get car carriers, the big, large? No.
Unless we do, it's like it pretty much deliveries that just comes.
Yeah.
It's pretty much on the back side.
Okay. I've seen a car carrier parked down there, but who knows how many years ago that was, so.
There could have been another
Sure.
another dealership, because there's a number of them right there.
Sure. And then my other question was just puzzling, and I think it might just be a typo, but on page 9 of 14 out of the Planning Commission stuff, it refers to the shell of the building will be started in summer of 2023, and I'm not
That is
seeing.
incorrect, yes. There's no proposed expansion of the building or anything like that. So
Okay.
that is incorrect.
I thought maybe the hiding things and all of that was,
No,
okay,
that is,
thanks.
that is incorrect.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions, Director Dyer? Okay, seeing no other questions, I think at this point I'd entertain a motion.
There goes Wendy.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Shadrich.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council concur with the recommendation of the Planning Commission and approve, with conditions, the request for rezoning of 5820 Merriam Drive from I-1 Light Industrial District to PUDG, Planned Unit Development General District, with the use restrictions and the associated preliminary development plan for a commercial building.
Okay, we have a motion, and I have a second. Ms. Hands.
I'll second that.
Okay. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Shavetta?
Aye.
Councilmember Hands?
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell?
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy?
Aye.
Councilmember Neal?
Aye.
Councilmember Ryder?
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers,
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Looks like you're up again for easements.
For the plat, clerk will get over to it real quick. Just real briefly, this plat comports with the development plan that you all just approved. Just wanted to point out a couple things on here. There is an existing access easement here that is existing, so this plat shows that on there. So obviously, again, provides access for the other businesses further to the south. If you've ever been back there, there's an alleyway that goes on the backside of these businesses that are along Merriam Drive. And then also that there does provide perimeter utility easements for the site. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Dyer? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion. Ms. Shadrich.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council accept the dedication of easements and right-of-way shown on the Nassau final plat.
Okay, we have a motion. I have a second. Ms. Hands.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I've had a request. Would it be okay if we take like a 5-minute break at this point? We have okay. We'll be back at, well, let's just say to reconvene at 9 o'clock. Okay, thank you. Okay, it looks like we're all back, and we'll kind of reconvene the council meeting this evening. Next item up is going to be, well, public hearings, but before we open the public hearing, I assume that we'll have Director Oliver kind of come forward and talk about our revenue, that was easy for to say, revenue neutral rate. Okay.
Tonight, and the first is to. Okay. We have two public hearings tonight. The first one is to consider the revenue neutral rate. As we've discussed, the revenue neutral rate really means the rate that a government levies the exact same amount of property tax that they collected in the previous year. So that means that you have no allowance for the CPI growth or the inflation, which for the year 2021, not even looking at what we've had this year, was about 6.5%. You get no allowance for that. And you get no allowance for new construction. So new buildings, new businesses that are built, you can't collect the increase increment from that as well. So really a revenue neutral philosophy, if you go with that philosophy, it requires that a government provide this year's services at last year's prices because you can't increase your revenue. So what that would look like for us if we kept the rate at the same rate or at the revenue neutral rate, if we would actually have to lower our mill levy, actually lower our property tax rate. So last year, we had a total assessed valuation of $225 million and a property tax rate of 27.665. Total property tax levy, $6,236,000. This year, we have an assessed valuation of $247 million. So we would actually have to lower our rate in order to maintain that same amount. City staff has proposed and recommended that the city not lower their property tax rate, but instead keep it at the same rate that it was last year at 27.665, which would be a property tax levy of $6,850,000, and thereby capturing the growth from inflation and then also capturing those new improvements that were made. How does the city's mill rate compare with others in Johnson County? You can see that we are towards the bottom, towards the lower end of mill levy rates within the county. And as far as an intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate, this is a list of the primary cities in Johnson County, and you can see that they all indicated that they were going to exceed the revenue neutral rate, including the county. So I would be happy to answer any questions before we open up the public hearing.
Do we have any questions for Dr. Oliver?
Okay.
Oh, I see no questions. At this point, I guess I'll use that for open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to come forward? Please come forward, sir. Please state your name and address for the record. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Bill Carter. I live at 6506 Goodman Drive. My family has paid property taxes in this city for 67 years. My father built a home in 1955. Members of my family have been in Merriam since then. And some of you know I was a professional engineer for 40 years. So I did a lot of revenue generation, budgeting for cities. So I'm quite familiar with the numbers that you go through. And as you guys might know, there's kind of a bad time in America right now. People are having to do without. And for many, many years, I've followed these councils' recommendations, and it was kind of ironic today that there are people here to want tax abatements, TIFs, this, all in the light of helping improve the city's revenues. Well, I'm here to tell you that hasn't worked for many, many years. Yes, it may have increased revenue, but it's just not showing up in people's tax bills. And I went back many, many years. I keep great records, and I went back to see, is there ever a time that Merriam didn't charge me more the year before? And it's not uncommon for entities to reduce their mill levy. It happened with Johnson County in 08 and 09 when housing market collapsed. And I don't want to bore you with the numbers, but for me personally, my appraised value has gone up 7.5%, 4.6%, 9.9%, and then this year, 16%. Well, there's nothing I can really do with the appraisers. I can go out and argue, but they really have the deck stacked against me. Well, guess what Merriam's taxes did? 7.2, 3.8, 10.3, and 16.1, if you pass the taxes that are in front of you tonight. And I don't think, if you step back and really look at this, and I know staff has to gather in all the revenue, if you look at franchise fees, you look at sales tax on utilities, you combine all these things with all these prices going up recently, there's a huge amount coming to the city that should, in a sense, help offset the need to keep doing property tax increases. And if you guys go through this 16% increase, I myself saved plenty of money, I'll be okay. I'm not so sure a lot of your constituents can say that. I think they're hurting pretty bad going in there paying that kind of gas and food tax and all those things. So I would like to encourage you to tighten your belt, reconsider this need to keep adding money. I watched many cities in the Kansas and Missouri area do without, and they survived. Okay, they didn't have a new dump truck. They didn't have a new computer system for this. They didn't have this or that, and they survived. And I think it's time you guys, a lot of you haven't even been on the council 5 years, so you haven't even seen what I've seen over years and years of people promising you things and then it just doesn't appear. I mean, it just does, there's proof in the pudding. So thank you for your time and best of luck.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to go forward? Mr. Crone.
Billy Crone, 6633 Wed Street. I'm working on my public speaking punch card tonight. Do I get two or just one? Tonight you're going to decide if we will exceed the revenue neutral rate, a property tax rate, and if so, by just how far. Fun fact, I checked the US Census today. 11,017 is our current population. And 10 years ago it was 11,003. So we've been growing by about 0.1% in the last 10 years. Our footprint hasn't changed either since we're landlocked, of course. And yet every year the budget has increased a lot more than that 1.1%. Indeed, far, far beyond even the inflation that the US dollar, which averages around 3.1, look that up today too. And Merriam's property taxes have outpaced US inflation by 200 to 300% of, 2 to 3 times as fast as US inflation every year. Staff has prepared a 2023 budget that increases property tax collections by about $500,000 in this year alone. Residents face this increase after many years of other increases riding the wave of property values. The memo in the agenda tonight says, lowering the mill rate to R&R would require that the city provide this year's services at last year's prices or to cut services. Let's be clear. That is a false dichotomy. We don't have to choose between remaining absolutely revenue neutral and taking the full advantage of a mill rate that was appropriate decades ago with today's property values. It's also false because you can make up that difference with new commerce in the city. I think we've probably had quite a few new businesses open up and new sales tax come in the last 10 years. The plans we've talked about, the last several council meetings are not just to keep things the same, but to wildly expand, intentionally increasing our costs with the addition of a second assistant to the city admin and nearly doubling the city's grant lottery programs. These increases are why our property taxes are going up. It's not property values. There is an ocean of nuance between remaining revenue neutral and taking full advantage of the wave of property valuations. $500,000 of nuance, to be precise. And as custodians of the public trust, I would like you to negotiate that ocean of nuance and land somewhere in the middle. Compromise is all I ask, and it's something other cities have already achieved. Already this year, Shawnee, right next door, voted to restrain their budget. Growth at a lower mill rate than their staff were asking for. And Shawnee isn't landlocked. Over half of all taxing jurisdictions in Kansas, over 1,900 of them, in fact, have remained revenue neutral. We can do this. You can do this if you want to. Even right here in downtown Merriam, our drainage district did just that last month. The creek isn't falling in, their world isn't ending because they stayed revenue neutral, and I applaud them for that. Please give your neighbors a break, even just a small break compared to what we just gave a commercial developer. Don't simply ride the wave of property taxes and spend it all on new staff positions and program expansions in a city that hasn't needed to grow in a decade. We are just right, as it says behind you. We are just right without increasing the budget so much every year. Please take this opportunity to give your neighbors a break. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crone. Please come forward. Thank you. Give your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Rose Geringer. I live at 9931 West 56th Street for the last 23 years. My husband and I have raised 5 kids, and it's been a great place to do that. We came to the meeting last year when the council overwhelmingly supported exceeding their revenue neutral budget. to increase our property taxes yet again. And now that there are new council members, I am hoping that a robust discussion of lowering property taxes to give residents a break from inflation would be something that you guys were really here to do. I'm excited to see new faces on the council. I know some of you are really worried about affordable housing, and lowering the taxes on the homes that we already own will make them more affordable. For people on fixed incomes, raising their property taxes year after year makes those homes they've been in for decades unaffordable. So if you're interested in affordable housing, cut the mill levy, give us a break. We know that it sounds like you put this at the very end of the agenda this evening so that we could hear about what seems to be corporate welfare. We've heard about the contingency fund. We've heard about, expanding grant programs. I think there's places where we can tighten the budget like every household has had to do. We've got 8% inflation. I mean, you've got to give us a break. And I really hope that the new faces on the council would do just that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Geringer. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come forward at this time? Okay, please come forward. State your name and address for the record. No one knows you, Ms. Hupp, but
Nancy Hupp, 13700 West 90th Place in Lenexa. Okay. Yes, I do, so I can see them. Yes, I am no longer a Merriam resident, and I'm sad to say that. It was a tough decision, but necessity said I needed to move to a different type of community. I sat for 16 years where you all are sitting. When I hear people say, you and we and they and them, I think sometimes they lose sight of the fact that you all are property taxpayers as well. Your decisions will affect your own property taxes. But having been in these seats, you understand the decisions that you have to make to fund the different expectations that citizens have of the excellent snow removal, the beautification that happens every spring when the flower baskets go up, all that it takes to keep our streets in good condition, all that it takes to fund police, fire, community development, all those people who do services for you, saying, yes, we're going to do what I believe is the right thing in holding your mill rate, will affect all of you as well, as I said. But it means, too, that you'll be able to maintain the excellent services that you're doing for the city and its residents. Merriam's portion of the tax rate is small compared to the whole. And an actual savings that families will see is probably smaller than what they spend just in pocket change. So I'm urging you to be brave. Make what may not be the most popular decision, but I believe it's the right decision for today and 10 years down the road. We've all seen when you cut, you think we'll make up for it in the next few years. You never quite get back to where you thought you would be. So I urge you to make the brave decision. Thank you. And I wish I still had a Merriam address, but that's life.
You're always available to come back if you'd like.
My heart is here, yes.
We appreciate your service in the past and what you continue to do for the city, Ms. Hupp. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward? Okay. Okay. Seeing no one else coming forward, I'll close out the public hearing, or public meeting. Well, okay, I guess at this point I will entertain a motion
If there are no more comments.
Yeah, I see no more comments.
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Okay, Ms. Hands, please do.
I move that the council approve a resolution to levy a property tax rate exceeding the revenue neutral rate.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Ms. Yodridge?
Mr. Mayor, second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye, and I want to make the distinction that this is to exceed the revenue neutral rate. I'm still strongly in favor of reducing the mill rate to some extent. I think it sets an example and all, the rest of the communities. Yes, it's only a small piece of the property tax bill that our residents face, but if nobody steps forward and does that, it's never going to happen, and there are people in this community that need that. And we do have some programs to help people who are on fixed incomes, but I just think that we need to reduce the rate.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge.
I don't disagree with the sentiment that we're hearing from everyone. A lot of the feedback we're getting is that things are hard, and I think a lot of us, well, all of us who live in Merriam and pay property taxes know that things are hard. And I think we haven't raised our property tax rate in over a decade, I believe, since 2008. Yeah, so we've had some banner years when it comes to sales tax, and we've been really lucky through the pandemic to have sales tax continue to fund the city. So I think next year we need to have a serious conversation, if things continue trending this way, about lowering our mill levy and hopefully getting through this year. If anyone has questions about any of the programs that we offer to help with property tax and help with fixed income, et cetera, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help. With that, I vote aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I understand the sentiment that the people expressed in the audience, and we all do, and we all feel it ourselves as well. And we have opted for many of the programs to try to help those individuals on lower incomes and the elderly, and try to keep them in their houses. And actually, all of their Merriam taxes could be eliminated if they're at their appropriate income levels itself. So we're trying to do that and target those individuals that need it the most. I trust me, I feel it as well too. I own several properties in Merriam. So, but having said that, Director Oliver, I guess the next, we'll have you come forward and talk about our budget.
And I believe you probably need to. You're right. I'm sorry.
We'll pass the last one. Okay.
I don't do public hearings very often, and so I temporarily had a brain freeze. Okay. So at this point, we are going to have a public hearing to discuss adopting the budget. With adopting it, this would include $33,330,000 in expenditures, which includes the amount for our capital improvements, our debt service, and then our operating accounts. At the end of the year, it would have $30,949,000 in reserves. So if you would like to open a public hearing to adopt, then.
Okay. Well, before you sit down, do we have any questions for Director Oliver before we open the public hearing? Okay, I see no questions. All right. I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward and speak about the budget? Mr. Crone, go ahead.
I'll be brief, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to say, please trim some things out. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come forward? Okay. I See no one else coming forward, I will close the public hearing on the budget, and I would entertain a motion.
Can we have some discussion first?
Oh, I thought we were discussing that before we started that.
Well, I-
Please. Yes, Mr.
Council
Ca-
discussion.
Yes,
Yeah,
Mr. Caldwell, go ahead.
You
Yes.
need to turn your mic on again.
Turn on your microphone, please.
As this budget's presented, I'll be voting against it. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody because I've been really consistent with this message every time we've discussed the budget. It's going to be a painful vote because I like the budget. I like the things that are in it. I like the direction it's taking the city. However, it's missing one thing, and that thing's a deal breaker for me, and that is a modest reduction in the mill levy. With appraised values of residential property going up 13% and commercial property going up 6%, our discussion should be how much we're reducing the mill levy, not what a budget that doesn't reduce the mill levy. It's just not right. So, we moan and complain about this whole revenue neutral thing and the state legislature imposing itself on local property taxes. Well, we're getting what we deserve. This is the exact behavior that the state legislature is trying to change. And so, for those reasons, I'll be voting against the budget.
Okay. Mr. Neal?
I have pretty much the same sentiment. This is my 5th year on the council. Each year, there's one or two of us that have come back and say, hey, we need to lower the mill rate because the property tax values are going up 20% for residential property tax owners. And the tax burden I got data from the county a year or two ago, and literally for the last 10, 15 years, the burden has been shifting. The increases on the residential side in value have been massively outpacing the commercial value. We've also got a bunch of our commercial properties paying property tax into a TIF district, which can't be used for the operating budget. And many of those projects have been completed, and the TIF obligations are satisfied, and they could be removed from the TIF district by the vote of the council. We haven't done that yet. Instead, we're funding private development at what I consider excessive amounts. We should at least make an effort to recognize the people that have lived in Merriam for years and years and lower the mill rate to some extent. It used to be Al and I every year would say the same thing, and Chris would say the same thing in counter arguments. But at some point, we've got to start sending a message that we care about the long-term residents that have been here. And, I'm seriously, and the other thing is our budget doesn't include things that we should be doing, such as taking care of West Vernon Place drain. It's 5-6 years down the road. I know that's not this current budget, but we're just going in the wrong direction, I think. So.
Any other discussions? Okay, and I understand where everybody's coming from, and I think there will be a time, and of course it's up to the council this evening to make this vote. But yeah, I think we all are in agreement that we would like to reduce the mill, or not just the mill rate, but reduce our tax load. But is now the right time? And we have directed staff, and they've brought us a good budget, whereas we've asked for additional programs to help those that are in need, those that are on low or moderate income, and that's what they brought us back. So if we don't want them to go in that direction and you choose to not approve this budget, then we're going to have to take some things out, and that would be for the will of the council at that point to do that. Ms. Ryder.
I'm just throwing this out there, but I was wondering if it was possible to, it sounded to me like we were increasing by 4% for inflation, and I was wondering if we could just match what inflation was for the country instead of just a set 4%.
So I think we discussed that at a previous meeting. I know Bruce brought it up, right? Correct.
As I remember the numbers, there was, consumer price index was going up 6.2%. And for our property tax to match that 6.2, it would take, was it a half mil or a 1 mil reduction?
It was a half.
It was a half mil reduction, and that's what I would recommend we do. I just find it somewhat appalling that we're raising property tax collection more than the consumer price index. And so that'd be very modest, and it was pointed out that that would be a symbolic at best because it wouldn't really be very meaningful. And you're right, but it would be a good symbol as opposed to not raising it, which is also symbolic in a very less positive way.
Okay, Ms. Shadrich.
I will say this, the budget that has been put together is detailed and provides for the needs of the city, and understanding that the actual amount of property tax that goes to the city from what our appraisals is quite small in comparison to what goes to the state, the school district, county, et cetera. But with the budget as is, and understanding some of the council goals that we've had and stuff like that, just because we have the money doesn't mean we are spending it, if I understand that correctly. So from my perspective, if I see a proposal for a sculpture or something that's going up next year, I mean, even as the daughter of an artist, I'm telling you, it's not gonna fly with me, because that until we're in a stable environment, I do feel like there are things we should be able to consider over the next year, that are not necessary given the context and the circumstances of how our lives are being lived right now. And I hope my dad doesn't watch that YouTube video, because I will get a stern text message in all caps. But that's where we're at.
Mr. Silva's first.
I don't disagree with Mr. Caldwell, and I think he's made a good argument. The problem I'm having tonight is I agreed on some council goals that the city used to create this budget. So I feel like I'm going to have to stand by that, but I am very interested in discussing reducing the mill rate when we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Mr. Neal.
The bottom line is, we're talking, so the sense that I just heard from some of the other council members is that, yeah, well, we want to go ahead and pass this budget, but we want to restrain spending. The bottom line is that money's still going to be collected from our residents, and it's going to go in a reserve fund if we don't spend the money. So why not just reduce the mill rate a little to, again, send a message that we notice what's happening and we do care. That's what I've been trying to do for a couple of years, and I completely agree with everything Bruce said. And I'm really sad about this because I think we've tried to send this message that continuing just to increase the taxes on individual residents without any acknowledgement that what the uncertainty that many people are facing. I recognize, again, there are some programs to help, but how many people are going to, I don't know, we need to just do it, I think, as a council and reduce it by some amount, but that's.
Mr. Veda.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everyone's sentiments of, I understand it's hard for me. Like, I mean, it's hard for all of us. We're all citizens of Merriam, and we all understand everyone's I try to understand everyone's shoes as much as possible. So I understand. I appreciate everyone coming and commenting tonight. I take those comments to heart. I truly do. I will say that, when we talked about this a few meetings ago and talked about reducing the mill levy even just by a half a mill. We talked about being able to add these grant programs and how they're for the greater good and how they can impact everyone in the community as well, and maybe impact them more than the $5 a month or $6 a month that this reduction of half a mill rate would do. And so for me, it's about the greater good and that we can impact everyone in the community with this instead of maybe giving everyone $4 a month back. And that's my 2 cents, and that's where I'm coming from this with.
Ms. Ryder?
I think it was mentioned last meeting that we are unique in this city, that we do have the capability of providing the grant programs and things for the citizens who need it. As the gentleman mentioned earlier, he's saved and he's good, but he knows other people who are not good. Well, those are the people most likely who are going to be able to apply for the grants. And as Stacy just mentioned, the amount of money that we would be saving by reducing it by half a mil is so minuscule that it's not really worth it, in my opinion. I think we averaged it out to be about $12 a year savings for each individual, which if we're going to reduce the mill rate, we need to do a big chunk, not just a little half mill thing. So
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Anybody else have any comments they'd like to? Mr. Neal?
So a half a mil, is it correct that would reduce, if I'm remembering, approximately 100,000 or something from the budget?
300.
Surely we can find 120,000 somewhere. I mean, we were adding a new
It's $1.20 a month. A half a mill's $1.20 a month.
I understand that. We're also adding a new FTE as well. So $1.20 a month, but it's the direction that we're going. And if none of the taxing jurisdictions are willing to roll it back at all, a little bit, nobody ever will. And the rest of the taxing jurisdictions have a much bigger impact on our Merriam residents also. So we send a message one way or the other by what we do with the mill rate.
Okay.
I
Ms.
would,
Hands?
from my standpoint, at home, I have to budget that there is inflation. And so I'm going to have to be sure that I have more money so that whatever happens, okay. And then I will have to make adjustments once those expenses come in. I think we, the city, are facing unknown expenses as well and inflation rates. So I'm very much comfortable with staying with the proposed budget.
Thank you. Any other discussion before I call for a vote? Okay, I see no more discussion. I would entertain a motion, and we'll see where this goes. Ms. Hands?
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approve a resolution to adopt the 2023 operating budget as proposed.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second? Ms. Yodridge?
Mr. Mayor, second.
We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, could you please call for the
Councilmember Leahy.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
I'm going to vote no.
Councilmember Ryder.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Aye.
Councilmember Shavetta.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
No.
Motion passes 6-2.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And that is a difficult discussion, and obviously all the people up here would like to be able to reduce it. We're trying to weigh what's in the best interest of the city and our residents, whether it be grants to help the people most disenfranchised or helping those individuals. I know we all want to see that reduced. I also know Ms. Hupp is here and Ms. Hands were on the council where 1 year the city was literally broke, and they had to raise the mill rate 6 mills in 1 year. I don't want to see this council ever get to that position where we might be confronted with that. I know it was a difficult decision for everyone. I appreciate all the input and your discernment on what was best for the city. But I do foresee sometime in the future where we will be able to roll back the mill rate. And it'll be a happy day when that happens, when that does occur. So, all right, well, let's move right along as I lose track of where I was at. But let's see. Looks like are we up to monthly finance report? Do we need, it's in the packet. Does anybody need to have any questions for Director Oliver, or are we just good with what we saw in the packet? You're doing a good job, by the way. We done. Okay. All right, well, we'll move right along from that. We have the Planning Commission minutes are in there as well. So is there anything else from staff, Mr. Engel?
Only thing I have is that we've been notified that KDOT will be doing a mill and overlay, excuse me, between I-35 and Antioch. I think they were supposed to start tonight, but have they started tonight? It's now Wednesday, so it'll be 3 nights in a row, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and they'll be working nighttime hours to avoid traffic.
Now, just as clarification, I read someplace it was all the way to Metcalf. Is that true?
At one point, it was going to be, but Water One has a water main
Okay.
that is underneath Antioch to Metcalf. So they have delayed that portion of the project so that they can coordinate the replacement of the water main. Because Water One, as well as us, as well as anybody that drives that street, recognizes that if you put a new street down and that water main breaks every single year, it won't be because we didn't coordinate properly. It'll be because it'll be some other reason. The reality is that coordinating that stretch of the project just makes the most sense.
Well, I saw that it had changed, but I didn't want to spread the word if I didn't.
So they've just Antioch to I-35, and they'll be working after hours.
Give me a second, go ahead.
So the other day I walked from my house to the community center. I try to do that as often as possible. And right under the Johnson Drive I-35 bridge, there is a detour sign alerting people of the construction that's further down Johnson Drive in Mission, I believe.
Okay.
It is blocking the sidewalk and making it impossible for anyone in a wheelchair or anyone on foot to pass it. And I think since we work so hard to make our city a walkable city and open to everybody, it'd be nice to have that move somewhere where people, especially with accessibility issues, to be able to use that sidewalk, because the south side of that street is the only side of the street that you can use to safely use lights to get from over the train tracks over east to the Quick Trip and stuff. So if we could get that moved someplace better, I'd appreciate it.
We'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Do we have an update on the facade of the building? Saw them painting, looks good.
In process.
Thank you for
Asked
that
and
update.
answered.
How many days have they been paying LDs now?
I don't know off the top of my head, but
It's a while.
yes.
Because I asked about it 2 weeks ago. So.
I know they were supposed to be working all weekend, but I didn't
see anybody this weekend, yeah.
Mm-mm.
They're moving forward on it, which we're very pleased with.
Yeah,
the
it
fact
looks
that they're
great.
Moving forward with it.
All right, if there are no other questions for Mr. Engel, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Mayor, I move we adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion and
Mr. Mayor, second that.
seconds. Madam Clerk.
All in favor?
I
Meeting's adjourned.